some observations on the perishability of strength forms. And I think this is valuable if we're using these particular contexts, whether it's, for example, a straight arm pressing context and forms, or pulling, or bent arm, for example, handstand push-ups, or working towards objectives such as one arm chin-ups and things like this. How valuable they are for you and what they're worth investing, and whether they're worth investing in for you in your particular practice. So the observation that I have is that straight arm strength forms are less perishable over time than bent arm strength forms. So as an example, just some of the context that I shared, things like forms as straight arm pressing work, or planches, or even things like, say, front lever forms, straight arm pulling, and back lever forms, and things like this. I believe that if you build these up sustainably and progressively over time, they will stay with you for a lot longer than bent arm strength forms. For example, things like, say, handstand push-ups and one-arm chin-ups and things like this. This is, of course, entirely debatable, and I do believe that it relies and depends strongly upon your history of practice with strength in general, and also what you've invested more heavily in. However, both with regards to my own experience and also reflecting on other people's experiences, sharing what they carry with them for a longer term, I've essentially heard a lot more people losing things like their handstand push-ups and one-arm chin-ups and things like this, as opposed to things like a press handstand, or even like a straddle planche or a front lever. These are things that at some point just start to be within the body and part of the structure, and something that you can just do. There's some reasons behind this, and I think one of the main ones is with regards to the preparatory stages and the developmental process that is required to make straight arm strength forms. And I'm more kind of referring here to perhaps higher level strength forms, or higher intensity ones, to make these sustainable in the long term of practice. So when we're working with straight arm context, we're very much in a need of developing and conditioning the integrity of the tendons, and also of the entire connective tissue, and even to an extent the type of pressure that the skeletal structure is able to sustain in positions like a planche or something like this, or even a front lever, which demands a high intensity necessarily with regards to it's just the structure that it is. Even if you're holding for a lower level of time, something like 3 to 4 seconds in a maximal progression for one of these high-level strength forms, it's a lot of angular pressure and loading on parts of the connective tissue, such as the main medial lateral tendons and things like this, that can quite easily sustain a lot of micro trauma in that process. And if it's not progressed in a developmental way, according where the practitioner is and where they're looking to head towards, it can, of course, become something quite problematic, chronic injury and things like this. But if it's approached in a sustainable way, and those benchmarks are realized, whether that's, for example, a straddle planche for a certain amount of time, or even a tuck planche or a tuck front lever or a single press handstand, normally once those are then achieved, due to the amount of time that is required in order to invest in the sustainable development of that, it's something that you don't lose so easily. So these are things which I personally feel I carry for, within my structure itself. Even if I'm, for example, have a phase which I've been training other things, and I kind of feel a little bit, say, weaker or not as strong as I feel I might normally do if I was continuing a stronger investment in terms of maintenance in those places, I'm still able to perform them. However, in some cases, some other bent arm strength contexts of the same, can we say, level on this kind of skill tree that we're conceptually referring to, these are much more easy to lose. And that comes to a second point of these 2 points. Rather than just the skeletal structure and the connective tissues and the physical layer as a whole, of course, adapting to these types of stresses that are common to straight arm strength work. With this type of practice as well, because it's necessarily more stiff in its quality and works more with isometrics and extended holds and things like this. We tend to find that there is a lot more neuromuscular activity happening in this expanded space or this expanded time. So for example, if you're performing a handstand push-up or a one-arm chin-up or something like this, there is, just even if it's just a few seconds, that's the maximum amount of maximal strength output that you're going to have to exert for that single repetition or those few repetitions if it's repeated. However, if you're holding something like a planche form or a front lever or things like this, you have to sustain that maximal force output for a much longer period of time. Like even if you're really struggling with a repetition for a one-arm chin-up, it might be like 3 seconds, maximum 4 seconds. But then if you're holding, for example, for repeats, like a high intensity straight arm strength form, for 4, 5, 6, maybe up to 8 seconds, if it's kind of a moderate progression for yourself, so to speak, there's a lot more time under tension involved in that context. And what this does is that it really heightens the contractile potential of the nervous system in that particular form. And I believe it has a lot more transferability in general to then the neuromuscular efficiency that you're capable of throughout a range of different straight arm strength forms, and of course with some transferable application to other contexts such as bent arm strength as well. So further to actually conditioning the physical structure in a progressive way in which it's then sustainable even if you're not visiting these contexts for some time, it also primes the nervous system in such a way that it is able to deal with a maximum intensity contraction of all the muscle fibers and everything involved to sustain that particular form to an extent which is perhaps not so sustainable when working just with bent arm strength forms, which have a much shorter amount of time under tension. And this is also something that we can perhaps see with high intensity strength training, by which I mean if we're working within a repetition range in which, I'm referring to weight training here, sorry, a rep range in which, again, the nervous system is required to, for these, 2, 3, 5 repetitions maximum, to really express the maximal intensity, the maximal neuromuscular efficiency is able to in those few repetitions, rather than, for example, working like 15, 20 repetitions for, say, back squats or something like this. This will, of course, develop on the musculoskeletal layer, a type of endurance, a type of conditioning, but it will not have an effect to the nervous system to the extent that would working with these much lower repetitions, even down to the singles and 1 rep maxes and things like this. So this is perhaps something that you can use to help guide the orientation of your individual strength practices when referring specifically, for example, to bodyweight practices. What is worth developing more time? What is worth investing more time in? The other thing to consider lastly with that is general experience of the, or should I say experience of the general practitioner, by which I mean unless you have been brought up in such practices in which straight arm strength is a very integral part of it, which I mean namely gymnastics. If this is not a practice that you've been brought up with from a young to a teenage adolescent age, then this is going to be something that will require a lot of foundational development in order to be able to sustain certain stresses and to be able to have a force output that will translate to holding things like a tuck planche or performing a front lever or something like this. So bent arm strength is something that people are a lot more familiar with, a lot more well versed with, both on the physical layer and of course understanding the concept really of what a bent arm strength movement or strength form is, even if they haven't progressed through certain ranks in a way that's designed to lead them towards a high level strength skill, like for example progressing through just basic horizontal pushing and pulling with a particular structural a particular structure and with a particular intention in mind that will lead towards those things, rather than just doing push-ups and pull-ups for the sake of conditioning or something like this. So with strength forms, straight arm strength is something that requires a lot more investment from most people before they can bring themselves to what might be considered, a baseline, like just a 5-second tuck planche hold or something like this. So it's very much worth something investing time in if it's something that you have not invested time in the past, and also necessarily with an understanding that it does need a lot of time. People often say that they feel this straight arm strength work is developing incredibly slowly, and that is quite true because it needs to develop slowly because it relies on the adaptation of your physical structure and your tissues, and as I say, in some cases even your skeletal structure, to be able to sustain the stresses on it, which are not generally common in every day. So we might find a bent arm strength movement when I decide to push something along the floor if I need to pull something, but it's not very often that we need to express straight arm strength in the way that it's requested in these particular forms. So take that into consideration when reflecting on, first of all, what you are investing the most in, whether it's regards to bent arm strength forms or straight arm strength forms. If you feel there's any particular place lacking with regards to your particular orientations for strength practices. And then lastly, in looking forward, considering what is required in order to maintain those strength forms. So for example, for me, I'm not so interested in high-level strength forms in which I have to keep them consistent in my practice. I have to practice them every single week just so that I maintain them. For me, this is not something that I feel is then sustainable, because if I have to do it every single week or I lose it, it's not something I can ever really truly own. And yet, if I don't do a tuck planche for 2 years, I'm very, very confident that I will be able to still be able to perform a tuck planche in 2 years' time without even being able to try it, just because of my the body has been built in this way through the previous years of practice. So some food for thought. Take it into consideration. Have a look at your own practice. Reflect where you are, where you have been, and where you're thinking towards going. And hopefully these are some perspectives that can help you in moving forward. If you're looking for guidance in this particular place, where do I start? How do I progress? Where does it lead to in both of these areas? We've got the video resource library, of course, which is one of the main ways you are able to self-direct your own practice, have the knowledge that you need, and have the security and understanding that it is leading you in a progressive way rather than just kind of following things and not quite sure knowing where they're going. And also, it was an opportunity to be able to then expand your practice out and take a look at the other subjects that we are studying in this program and sharing with people so that they can help develop their physicality and also the general exploration and vibrance and joy and exuberance of being in this practice of movement.